Miss Erin here today, and today we have a very fun Famous Friday, and there is a reason I'm wearing this hat and sporting my jazz hands today because we are talking about Bob Fosse. Now, Bob Fosse is our first dance legend that is no longer with us. He was born in 1927, which was almost 100 years ago. 93 years to be exact, and he passed away in 1987, so he is no longer with us. But this is by far the most excited I have been for a Famous Friday because I love everything Bob Fosse. He's made such an impact on the dance and musical theater and film world, and you're gonna see why, because I'm gonna talk about a lot of the things that he's done, and so many of these things maybe you haven't heard of because you're younger. But this gives you a perfect opportunity to look up a bunch of these musicals and all that kind of stuff. So let's get started. All right. So like I said, Bob Fosse was born in 1927. He was born in Chicago, Illinois. And just for a little bit of background, Chicago was a large city 100 years ago, as it is now, and Chicago was kind of the birthplace for a lot of things. Not only was there a huge music scene there, but a lot of jazz dance, actually, as well as jazz music, came from Chicago. So he had a really good place to grow up in, and even now, there's a lot of jazz companies, and even contemporary companies and dance companies within Chicago, and it's a huge center for dance. So Bob Fosse was a musical theater choreographer, dancer, theater director, film director. He kind of did a lot. He even sang, he danced, he kind of did it all. And he has a very distinctive style that we talk about in musical theater and even in jazz a little bit. So he kind of had this style that was a lot about jazz hands, okay? So lots of open hands, not so much spirit fingers like we think, like we're like, ooh, jazz hands, not so much that, but a lot of wide fingers. When we say jazz hands, he was all about jazz hands, okay? He also had a lot of turned in knees, a lot of like contractions and rolled shoulders and all this kind of stuff that is very Fosse-esque. Okay, so there's a lot of things if you ever hear a teacher say, this is very Bob Fosse inspired, or this is Fosse, or da-da-da-da, it's because he has such a distinctive style. So he began performing at the age of 13 in a professional performance with Charles Glass, and they went under the stage name of the Riff Brothers. As he continued growing older, he was recruited into the United States Navy towards the end of World War II, and he performed on a number of military and naval bases for the troops. After the war, he moved to New York City, which of course is the center for Broadway and musical theater, and he began performing there and did a lot of theater performances. So before he transitioned to film, he did a lot of theater performances. Now, he was noticed by Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, which are two very famous people that you should look up. And Jerry Lewis is actually the person who gave Bob Fosse his very first choreographic opportunity. So in 1953, he signed a contract with MGM, and that was a big deal because a contract means you can work. Right? It means that you're not just kind of trying to book a job here and there. You have opportunity with the contract. They can get you jobs. They have more connections like that. So he signed a contract with MGM in 1953. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, he began transitioning into a lot of theater. And a lot of that theater was Broadway. And so I have a list here because I can't remember all of these off the top of my head, so I'm going to read these off here. So in 1954, he choreographed his very first musical, which was The Pajama Game. In 1955, he choreographed for Damn Yankees. 1957, he choreographed for New Girl in Town. And in 1960, he choreographed and directed Redhead, and that actually won him a Tony Award for his choreography. In 1961, How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. He was a director and choreographer for that. In 1966, he choreographed and directed for Sweet Charity, which is an excellent musical and has wonderful music. If you know the song, Hey Big Spender, that is from Sweet Charity. 1973, he directed Pippin and choreographed for that and won a Tony for Best Direction of a Musical. In 1975, he was the director and choreographer of the musical Chicago, which that's also one of my favorites. In 1986, he choreographed and directed for the Broadway production of Big Deal and was nominated for 5 Tony Awards and won for Best Choreography. 5 Tony Awards. Whoa. Okay, so then he kind of started transitioning into film kind of throughout his theater career, I guess you could say. So again, I have a list because it's so long that I can't remember them off the top of my head. 1957, he choreographed the film version of Pajama Game. So if you remember, I just mentioned he was choreographer for the Broadway theater version of the Pajama Game. So this was the film adaptation. In 1958, he appeared and choreographed for the film version of Damn Yankees. And in 1969, he was choreographer for and director for Sweet Charity, which was the film adaptation of the musical Sweet Charity. In 1972, he directed and choreographed for Cabaret with Liza Minnelli, and won 8 Academy Awards, including Best Director. In 1974, he performed a song and dance in the film version of The Little Prince. In 1979, he co-wrote and directed the semi-autobiographical film All That Jazz. So this was a film that was sort of based on his life, and he wasn't actually in the movie, but choreographed and directed it, and that one is a very good one to watch. So for that, he won 4 Academy Awards. The film won 4 Academy Awards, and it was his 3rd Oscar nomination for Best Director. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the Fosse style. So like I said, he has a very, very distinct style, and a lot of that has to do with jazz hands, turned in knees, and a lot of like shuffling, I guess you could say. It's a lot of times it's called the Fosse amoeba. So if you know what an amoeba is, it kind of crawls across the screen. And so it's the Fosse amoeba is this sideways shuffling with rolled shoulders and jazz hands. There's lots of videos that you can watch on that. So he was very influenced by Fred Astaire, who's another dance legend you should know, and he used a lot of props like hats, canes, chairs. He liked to use he liked to use gloves because he did not like his hands, and that's a lot of the reason he actually used hats is because he was influenced by his own self-consciousness. So, I mean, I can see why someone would want to wear a hat because they just look so good. I think I'm gonna start wearing this to class. Be careful. Some of his most popular numbers, which I'm going to include snippets of those in the comments or in the description box, you can watch those, include Steam Heat. So if you know the song Steam Heat, I got Steam Heat. That's from the Pajama Game. And then Hey Big Spender, I already talked about that. That one's from Sweet Charity. And in Sweet Charity, there's a dance called The Rich Man's Frog, which is an instrumental song, but that is a really good example of his kind of signature style. There's nothing quite like Fosse and his style. So, like I said, he is the very first dance legend that is no longer with us. In 1987, he passed away from a heart attack, and that is not to say that he did not leave a huge impact on the dance world and theater world and film and everything he was involved in. He was so accomplished and so charismatic, and his choreography was so unique for the time and is still now. There's nothing quite like Fosse. All right, you guys, I just threw a lot of information about Fosse at you. However, I want you to take this opportunity to go look up and find your own videos and information on Fosse, because there's so much more out there, but I wanted to share some of the highlights with you and why he's kind of so important to the dance and theater world, and why he's still such an influence on the things that we do at the studio, on the things that dancers do around the world, especially in the theater scene. So I'm so happy that we got to talk about Fosse. I got to bring out my jazz hands and my hat, and I think I'm going to start doing this every day because it just feels fabulous. All right, so don't forget to fill out the quiz down in the description box. This is the last quiz for our first drawing for a free private lesson with me, and maybe I'll wear my hat, and you can wear a hat too. So make sure you fill that out and watch the video and share with your friends, your dance friends, and make sure you keep dancing, you keep staying strong, you keep eating healthy, you keep getting lots of sleep, so that when we can get back in the studio, you are ready to go. All right, you guys, I will see you next time. Bye.